My kids think it's hilarious.
So good morning or afternoon now. We've passed, yes, 1 o'clock. Good afternoon, Mark Devlin. Thank you so much for joining me on Wise Women Weekdays. How are you?
No worries, Karen. I'm a bit tired, been quite busy lately, but pressing on regardless.
Doing the deed. And we just literally we talked about your microphone. It's your trademark, isn't it? And you say your kids think it's hilarious. Is that right?
They do, yeah, they laugh at me, but they laugh about me about all kinds of things. This microphone is a bit of a trademark. It's a DJ thing. I came up in the DJ game gripping microphones in clubs and it's just stuck. So now I do my live talks and I like to hold a mic in my hand. I'm not a fan of these lapel mics.
No.
I don't know what to do with my hands when I've got those on, so I
I was
just
going to
like
say that's the
holding
thing. It's
things.
a safety factor, isn't it? You're gripping onto it. As long as you don't start licking it like a lollipop or anything, you are using it. So I'm sure you wouldn't, but you never
No,
know. You never
I
know. The world.
gesticulate with one hand, but I wouldn't know what
Right.
to do with two.
No, have two lollipops. Stereo. Okay,
Mm.
so Mark, how would I've just put a few, I never put questions down, but I thought let's just see, let's learn a little bit more about you, the man. How would you describe yourself?
Well, I know how plenty of other people would describe me, but in terms of my own description, I'm a former club and radio DJ. I still do a bit of it. I don't DJ in clubs anymore. I did for 20 odd years. That was my full-time job. I still play the odd gig. They tend to be at festivals such as UpRise and Shine, and it's usually where I'm invited to speak, where I do a DJ set as well. But after doing that job for 20 odd years and starting out in radio, on a station called Fox FM in Oxford. And then I moved on to Galaxy Radio in Bristol, did a show there for a couple of years. My club DJing career really took off, got a lot of bookings throughout the UK. And I was fortunate enough to travel internationally and do gigs in many different countries. But I got to the point where I found that that lifestyle and that mindset just wasn't enough for me. I had a lot of big questions in the back of my mind, which I wanted answering. And I just found the lifestyle that I drifted into, which was basically nocturnal, to be quite vacuous and not very spiritually fulfilling. So I reached the point where I started to do some research. I got put onto the books of David Icke by my dad. I also discovered the first Zeitgeist movie, and I was introduced to that by Danny Rampling, actually, a fellow DJ. We got stranded in an airport lounge in Riga, Latvia in 2008, and we got chatting. And Danny said, "Oh, this amazing movie you got to see called Zeitgeist." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, you got to see it. It will blow your mind." And it did. It really changed my worldview. And so that set me off on a path of research to try and better comprehend the true nature of this world, this reality generally, what we're doing here, who really runs and controls things. And I realized that the world is very different to the way that it's presented to us as. And I specifically wanted to know how that played out in the world of music, of which I'd been a part. And that became my specialist area of research. I threw myself in it with an absolute fervor. And the result of that was my first musical truth book, which I self published in early 2016. And by that point, I'd done 5 years worth of research into the true nature of the music industry, what it's really there for, which is unfortunately not fun and entertainment. I wish it was, but it's there for other reasons. And so that's been the path that I've been on for the past 15 years or so, researching this stuff full time now, putting out books, doing live talks, seminars, conferences, doing podcasts, and just getting this information out in any way that I can.
Wow, that describes you very well. So it wasn't, it was like the movie mainly, Zeitgeist, that was the one trigger. You didn't have like a eureka moment or a spiritual experience that put you on this path of delving into rabbit holes and deep sort of potholes that the country is covered with at the moment, physically, isn't it? But there wasn't a moment, there wasn't like this spiritual thing that happened.
No, it wasn't a singular moment of epiphany. A lot of people
Mm,
say that there was a specific point in time that they can, identify as when they first woke up to truth. With me, it was a gradual process, and I would say it began around 2007. I mean, I've always been someone that's sought knowledge.
mm,
So even as a kid, I didn't accept certain things that were being taught. I can remember that I never took to the idea of a royal family. So
mm,
when I was in infant school, we were taught to revere the Queen. And then in 1977, it was a silver jubilee and there were street parties and stuff. But it never sat right with me, the idea that there was this one family who, over and above all others, were put on a pedestal and we all had to worship them and bow down to them. I just never struck a
mm.
chord with me, that. And there have been other things as well. You know, I went to Israel, the so-called Holy Land, in 1993 on a bit of a pilgrimage. At that time, I identified as a Christian, so I wanted to go and see all these sites. Went to Jerusalem and Sea of Galilee and all these places. And I went to Egypt as well in the 90s, went to the pyramids and did a Nile cruise. And that was amazing. That's kind of blew my mind. I read Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods book in the mid 90s. So even back then, I was sort of showing the signs of wanting to know more about what this world was about, but it didn't really kick off until about 2007. And it was a gradual process from that point forward. In 2010, I had a real breakthrough when all the stuff that I'd been looking at up to that point really seemed to consolidate and start to make sense to me in a way that it hadn't before. So 2010 was a pretty major year for me.
Turning points. It's funny, I'm surprised I didn't bump into you because I did the same thing. I was in Israel doing the sites, I was on a kibbutz, and then I went to the pyramids and all that. And yeah,
Right.
it's the kind of craving knowledge, isn't it? And then you want more, more, more. But
Hmm.
you've then kind of diversified because you obviously the DJ background, you started looking at artists, haven't you? Pop stars and famous singers. Can you tell us who was the first one? Who was the first one that sort of made you think, oh, it's not quite what we are led to believe, this music industry?
I can remember in the 1980s when I was at school, first hearing about this idea that Paul McCartney was really dead and he'd been replaced. And at the time, it sounded ridiculous. Some kid came into school, and I think he had a copy of the Abbey Road album where they're walking across the zebra crossing. And he said, "Oh, you know, this means that Paul McCartney's really dead because he's in a loose fitting suit and he's barefoot. And it's a funeral procession. You know, John Lennon's the priest, and George Harrison in denim is the grave digger. Ringo's a mourner, a funeral goer, and Paul McCartney is the corpse." And I was like, "Get out of here. What are you talking about? What have you been smoking?" You know. And all the other kids at school thought it was ridiculous as well. But it first planted that idea in my mind. And then years later, when I started researching this stuff, the Paul McCartney conspiracy came to the surface again. And I remembered what I'd heard. And by this point, I'd gained a bit of a comprehension of occult symbolism and how that all works and why it's used as a method of communication by those that run these industries. So I took a fresh look at it and I fell down about 5 million different rabbit holes all at once. No chance of ever climbing out of those. And just got into this whole area of the Paul McCartney conspiracy.
Mm,
And I very quickly, based on evidence, because there is a lot of evidence, this is not just some
mm,
wild, wacky tinfoil hat job conspiracy. You know, there's a lot to back up the idea or the fact, I would say, that we've had two Paul McCartneys. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to prove that the original one died in 1966, as per the conspiracy theory. The date we're given for that is September 11th or November 9th, depending on whether you go for the British or American date formats. But the idea is that the original McCartney died in a car crash in 1966 and was replaced by a guy that's been playing the public role ever since. That's very difficult to prove. But what you can prove is that there's definitely been more than one Paul McCartney. There's been more than one guy presented to us as Paul McCartney. There are all kinds of differences in facial features, in height, in body structure, in mannerisms. There have been forensic studies done of the two different characters by professional forensic scientists who have concluded themselves that we're looking at two different guys.
mm,
So that alone is cause for concern.
mm,
So if we can know for sure and we can prove that there have been two individuals presented to us as one of the most famous men in the world, straight away we're into a world of monumental deception and duplicity. And if that's the case with this one celebrity, are we really going to believe that that's as far as it goes and it stops
mm.
there? Or is it far more likely that we've been lied to about absolutely everything when it comes to not just the music industry, but
Mm,
we could expand that out into so many other different areas. But that was the first thing. So I got into the
mm,
McCartney Beatles research, and it was just non-stop from there, really.
mm. So whilst we're on the Beatles, I've never really been a fan of the Beatles. I think it's because it was, the decade before me. I've never really enjoyed their music that much, although I realise they're iconic. But two questions. Why would they do this? Why would they take him out as such and then replace him? What would be do you think the purpose is? And then also, once you've answered that, what is it about the Beatles? I mean, why were they created? Was it a really good bunch of people from Liverpool that happened to strike lucky, or have they been put there?
Well, people ask all the time what would have been the motive in replacing McCartney. And early on in my research, I came across the idea that he was not playing ball with the agendas that had been set out for the Beatles. He apparently was looking into the John F. Kennedy assassination in 1963, and he was due to provide a soundtrack to a documentary film by an attorney named Mark Lane called Rush to Judgment. And so, if the Beatles were controlled by forces beyond Brian Epstein, their manager, and George Martin, their producer, and I'll get onto that in a moment,
Mhm.
you can realize why McCartney going down that area of research wouldn't necessarily have gone down too well. So that's one reason that's given. Another is that it constituted a ritual sacrifice. And I know this sounds preposterous and outrageous to people when they first hear it, but unfortunately, the music industry is run by dark occultists, as is every other area of our lives. You get the same thing in politics, you get the same thing in the world of so called science, medicine, academia, the military, the mainstream media. It's the same networks, the same groups that control all these different institutions and these different walks of life. They're occultists, they adhere to certain rituals. Certain religious belief systems that they have, which are very dark in nature, and they do involve ritual sacrifices of certain important individuals. And for anyone for whom that does sound like too much of a stretch, I would simply say look into it. Do the research. You can read my books, but you can read books by many other authors that have gone into this. You know, Mark Passio is a former Satanist who has reformed and become a whistleblower himself, and he's got a lot to say about how these people operate. So the research is possible to do, and if you are prepared to accept that organized society is run by Satanists and dark occultists, then suddenly things like taking out a major celebrity and replacing them doesn't sound as ridiculous as it first does. So the Beatles come with a Cinderella fairy story to explain where they came from, and all major artists do. In the Beatles' case, we're asked to believe that they were four regular working class lads from Liverpool, nothing special about them. They put the group together at a school fete where Lennon met McCartney and they brought in George Harrison and all the others. They played a few gigs, made a bit of a name for themselves, went out to Hamburg, slogged it out on the gig circuit there. Brian Epstein, their manager, this record shop guy, really liked their music. He went down to London to try and sell them to EMI, and he got a deal. George Martin was hired as their producer, and they started making records, and the rest is history.
Mm,
That, as I say, is a cover story to explain where they really came from. Many researchers, not least the British military intelligence insider Dr. John Coleman, who wrote a great book in the early 90s called The Committee of 300 Conspirators Hierarchy, claims that the Beatles were the product of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, which is a social engineering think tank specializing in shaping and molding societal attitudes. So Coleman makes the claim in this book, and many other researchers, Matt Sergiu at the Occult Beatles site, which is definitely worth a look, is also well into this idea. And Mike Williams of Sage of Quay over in the United States has done a ton of research into the true nature of the Beatles. So it would seem that this group were selected to become the most prolific and influential pop group in music history. Quite simply, you do not get to rise to those heights and have that level of reach unless you've been handpicked for the job and unless you're pushing certain agendas that have been set out for you. So that's why the Beatles are all over the place. That's why even more than 50 years after their disbanding, we're still getting movies and
Mm.
documentaries and bloody charity sales and auctions of all their stuff still going on just to keep that Beatles myth alive and keep their name in the public consciousness because they've been very important to the controllers in terms of pushing certain agendas.
Wow, you certainly know your stuff. You didn't have to read that. That's all in your head, isn't it? All these.
Oh, I walk around with this
I
stuff in my
know.
head all day long, yeah.
It must be hard, actually. Do you find
Ask
time to
ask my
relax?
wife.
Yeah, I'm sure. You're at it again, Mark. So you mentioned. So what we're saying here is that they signed up. They've been picked like a boy band. I think in today's society, what we do, they've been picked to fulfill a certain agenda, which is working on the dark side. So are we saying here that, or are you saying that they kind of sold their soul to the unmentionable to gain fame and fortune? Is that sort of what's happening? And therefore they have to push the agenda
Yeah, there are
politically.
two main ways that bands like the Beatles get selected.
Oh,
One is that you come from the right bloodline family.
mm,
So ancestry, DNA, genealogy is very important to these controllers. You get certain families who, over multiple generations, are ushered into influential roles in society. It doesn't have to be as pop groups, it can be as actors, TV presenters, politicians, statesmen, lord mayors, big business owners, anyone that affects society in some way and who influences large numbers of people in their millions. So if you come from one of these families, you may well find yourself already groomed for future success. And it's decided very early on whether you're going to be a politician, a pop star, an actor, whatever it may be. There's a story which emerged during the COVID years involving the former nanny of Boris Johnson. And she went public by saying that she recalls very early on when Boris was a child, him being told by his father, Stanley, that one day he was going to be British Prime Minister. So it was already laid out for him that early on that that was going to be his future role. People think that presidents and prime ministers are selected in elections,
mm,
or elected, I should say, whereas the truth is they are chosen very early on. It's already known.
selected. Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
it's already known who the next so-called leader is going to be. And so it's the same with pop groups if you come from these important families. But another way that you can achieve fame, fortune, and success in these industries, if you happen to not come from the right family, is by selling your soul for fame and fortune.
yeah.
And that phrase can be taken either metaphorically or literally, because we're getting back into the realms of the dark occult and all these different rituals which get performed. And people are able to do some very unspeakable things and to get involved in some very dark areas in exchange for this engineered fame and fortune.
Mm.
And we find many examples of.
Do you ever remember there was a book, but I haven't read the book, but a movie called Boys from Brazil, way back, I think, in the 80s. And it was about these children that had been birthed and born, but they had been placed all over the world as youngsters. And then at a certain age, when it was the right time, they would all come into leadership. It was like they were selected to take over, a bit like other organizations though in the world at the moment.
Okay,
It's
Karen,
just been,
sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
I've been interrupted here, so let me just see what's going on.
okay.
Sorry, hold on. What's up?
No, so while Mark is just having a chat, I'm going to ask him about. Oh, there, are you back?
I'm back. Sorry. Yeah.
Don't worry.
You can edit that, right?
I'll try. Yeah.
I can edit it for you if needs be.
Yeah, maybe. I'm just raw. I just have a chat with people and it goes out. But yeah, we can edit
Yeah,
that.
no,
That's
no
not a
worries.
problem.
I just got interrupted there.
No
But
problem.
yeah, your
Yeah, I
question
just
about
thought
the boys from
Boys from
Brazil.
Brazil. Do you remember
Yes,
that?
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
saw
yeah,
that
yeah.
film.
I think Gregory Peck was in it, and it was quite,
That's right.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, they tell us what's happening. So a couple of things came up there because when you're saying about signing, selling your soul to the other side, to the devil or whatever, I always remember seeing a clip by Bob Dylan where he said he made a deal with the commander in chief, which I guess is the same thing. Really different name. But I want to go back when you said about Satanists and you spent some time and you mentioned a name of somebody who was an ex-Satanist. Can you be an ex-Satanist? Will they let you out? If you've signed yourself up, surely there's no way out.
Mark Passio has spoken about this,
Mm.
and he's addressed his past. He's made no bones about the fact that he was involved with the Church of Satan, which was set up by Anton LaVey in 1966, launched on the occult date of 30th of April, which is Walpurgisnacht. And he's been in various other groups as well. And he says that at the time, he was very angry and he had a lot of contempt towards organized society. He felt he'd been lied to about organized religion. He was raised in a Catholic family. But when he came to discover the true agenda of these Satanists and the way that they sought to use their knowledge of the occult to gain a power differential over everyone else and to dominate and enslave them, take away their rights and freedoms, and basically screw them over for their entire lives, he says that his conscience kicked in and he could no longer be a part of that system. And so he announced his intention to leave, and he announced his intention to communicate what he'd learned during those years to the general public at large. And he says the Satanists that he was working with let him go, and they said, "Good luck, because you're going to be bashing your head against a brick wall for the rest of your days. You're going to get nowhere. We could come out and tell them ourselves what we've been doing to them, how we've taken over these different walks of life, and what the world of the occult really is, and they wouldn't believe us even if we said it. So, best of luck, pal. On your way, off you go, boy." Because they just saw him as completely insignificant.
Right.
And this ties in with what various people have told me who have been in bands or they've been record producers or they've been involved in the record industry in some way. Many of them have emailed me over the years and they've said that they've been called into meetings where they've been offered the opportunity to gain great fame, success, and wealth, but it came at a price. And they had to sign a contract and they had to agree to basically be owned for their souls to be turned over to these controllers. And these people have said that it wasn't for them. They were like, "Thank you, but no thank you. Don't want to know." And they've said at that point, they will let you go because they believe that if you tried to tell anyone of the true nature of that meeting, they just wouldn't believe you. So they let you go. It's only when you sign the contract and you agree to what you've been offered that you become owned. From that point on, if you try and leave, there will be very grave consequences. You might find yourself suicided. You might find yourself discovered in a bathtub, having taken some overdose or other. You might find yourself in a terrible car accident. Something is going to happen to you if you try and break ranks and speak about what you're a part of. And
Mm.
this would explain a lot. This would explain why so many music artists who have been marketed as rebels,
Mhm.
anarchists, bit dangerous, bad boys of rock, anti establishment, had precisely zero to say about what was being done to us all during the COVID era. I spoke about
Yeah.
this endlessly. It was a major source of frustration for me. Basically, my book, Musical Truth 3, is me ranting and moaning about these tragic, sellout, pathetic celebrities who had nothing to say and didn't stand on our side, with very few exceptions. It's because they all knew that if they did come out and have anything vaguely critical to say about the agendas they've been asked to support, there would be grave consequences for them. That's why we found them all on script together, pushing the same message. Do what the government tells you, take the you know what.
Mm.
And
Mm.
none of them were rocking the boat.
Mm.
Again, with very few exceptions, Right Said Fred and uh,
Yeah.
Van
Van
Morrison and
Morrison, yeah,
yeah,
a few
not
others,
many others.
not many
They were
others.
all saying the same thing. So that just ties in with this idea that when you reach a certain level in the industry,
Yeah.
your soul is no longer your own, and you don't have a mind with which to think or a voice with which to speak.
Well, I think those that have tried to speak out, I mean, they've been tarnished, even posthumously. If you look at Michael Jackson, I think he tried to speak out and what happened to him. And then you had George Michael, who, what happened to him? And I think he died on a Christmas Day. And a few years later, his sister died on Christmas Day, which is a bit odd. And then the other one of name, no name, Symbol, who died in the lift, Prince. So there have been a few, I think, that have tried to, break the mold and speak out, but they haven't had a good ending, have they? Sadly.
It never does end well for them. I did a talk at one of your UpRise events,
Mm,
I think it was last year, which I titled Nostalgia Side.
that's right.
And I singled out Michael Jackson, Prince, George Michael, and Whitney Houston as four major artists from the 80s. Anyone of a particular age, generation would have grown up on their music in the 80s, and it would have meant a lot for them. And listening to it now would bring back all these nostalgic memories. And I made the point that these artists were deliberately taken out to destroy the nostalgic memories that they had attached
Yeah,
to them. That wasn't the only reason. I mean, I
yeah,
think they'd all done something to kind of become a thorn in the side and a
yeah,
pain in the arse of those that control the industries. Like you say, Michael Jackson and Prince spoke out about their respective record labels and were
yeah,
very critical of the nature of the contracts which artists enter into with these corporations. That's not going to go down too well. George Michael had similar comments to make about Sony, which was also Michael Jackson's record label. And George Michael was very critical of the wars of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were launched in the wake of 9/11. He even went on an episode of BBC's Hard Talk to criticize Bush and Blair at the time. So
yeah,
you can imagine that wouldn't have gone down too well. Whitney Houston, it seems she'd just become surplus to requirements. There were stories of her voice having failed. She just couldn't perform in the way that she used to. And you're useless to the industry
yeah,
by that point. If you can't be out there as a performing puppet on stage, generating huge amounts of income for the industry, well, then you're going to be worth more dead than alive. And we've seen so many examples of artists who pass away in some bizarre circumstance or other, having their record sales go absolutely through the roof in tribute to them. And this
yeah,
generates huge sums for their record labels, for their owners. So, in some cases, literally, you
yeah,
are worth more dead than alive.
yeah. And I think with Whitney, because she died of bathtub, didn't she? I think bathtub drowning.
Death by
And did her
bathtub. There's a
death
lot of it
by
around.
bathtub? Did her daughter not go through the same fate as well a few years later?
Yeah.
Death
There are
by
always
bathtub.
Yeah, there are always strange circumstances surrounding these deaths, which
Yeah,
again is another indication of the fact that they constitute occult
yeah,
rituals. So, as you mentioned, George Michael died on Christmas Day, a man best known for the lyric, Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart, passes away on Christmas Day of heart failure. Would that be by coincidence? And then a few years later, his sister also passes away on Christmas Day. So there's a 1 in 365 chance that George would pass away on a given day of the
mm,
year. And again, a 1 in 365-day chance
mm,
that his sister would do the same thing. And yet it happened. Michael Jackson passed away on George Michael's birthday, 25th of June. They were both artists signed to Sony, both critical of them. 25th of June is celebrated by Satanists as anti Christmas because it's exactly 6 months on from what we celebrate as Christmas. And Christmas is based around the winter solstice and the symbolic death of the sun
Yeah.
At its lowest point in the sky, where it's seen to die for 3 days and then be resurrected. Hmm, remind you of anything? And then
Mm.
it begins on its journey back to rebirth up to its high point, its zenith at the summer solstice, which is round about the 21st of June. So on the 25th of June, Satanists are celebrating the sun having reached its highest point in the sky and now beginning to slowly descend back down to its symbolic death, because they're all about darkness and death. And it would be just like them to celebrate the sun, beginning its journey back down into the underworld. So Michael Jackson passes away on anti Christmas. There was a guy named Prodigy who was a rapper with the hip hop group Mobb Deep, and he passed away after having highlighted the so called Illuminati. He was very outspoken about this secret society network which runs the record industry. He put it into some of his records, and he was very vocal about it in public comments that he
Mm.
made. He passed away on World Sickle Cell Awareness Day after having suffered from a very rare form of sickle cell anemia for many years. What are the chances of that happening randomly? Or is it more likely that these artists are taken out deliberately on certain dates? Whitney Houston died on the 11th of February, right before Valentine's Day, bearing in mind that most of her songs were love songs. And so,
Yeah.
in tribute to her, sales of her records went absolutely through the roof in time for Valentine's Day in 2012. And with so many of these artists, you find these little Easter eggs, these little clues that
Yeah.
are placed in the dates and the circumstances surrounding their passing away. Prince, we're told, died in an elevator when he had a song, Let's Go Crazy, where he was talking about, are we going to let the elevator bring us down? Oh no, let's go crazy. And he apparently believed that the elevator was a metaphor for base consciousness when it's going down into this material world, and then higher states of consciousness when it's going up. So there's some symbolic spiritual
Yeah.
belief systems there. But with every one of these strange deaths, you find unanswered discrepancies and anomalies and things that just don't add up. And with
Yeah.
Whitney Houston, as you mentioned there, her daughter, Bobby Christina, who she had with the singer Bobby Brown, was also discovered unconscious in a bathtub some years later. And she actually was discovered unresponsive in a bathtub in the same hotel suite, the LA Beverly Hilton in Los Angeles, where Whitney Houston turned up dead 24 hours beforehand. And she was revived. And then a day later, Whitney is discovered dead in a bathtub in the same hotel suite during the time of the 2012 Grammys. And there was an industry celebratory party that had been put on by Clive Davis, this record company executive who's said to have discovered Whitney Houston and been her mentor. And this party went ahead despite Whitney's body having been found a few hours earlier. And it's said to have had a celebratory vibe to it. So that would be another ritual then.
Yeah.
And so it's quite possible that Bobby Christina, the daughter, was intended to be sacrificed, and for some reason it went wrong and she
Yeah.
was revived, and it was then decided to take out Whitney instead. But that didn't let Bobby Christina off the hook, because a few years later she turned up dead in a bathtub, despite friends saying that she was terrified of baths after what happened to her mother, and she would only ever take showers.
Wow.
Nevertheless, turns up dead in a bathtub. And the most recent example of that we had was Matthew Perry, the Friends TV actor, who was found dead in a jacuzzi in his home. So, like I say, taking a
Yeah.
bath or a jacuzzi seems to
What
be a very
was there?
dangerous thing to do when you're famous.
And was there not a chef from one of the presidents of America? Didn't he die by water of some sort?
One of the presidents,
A chef, one of the cooks in the White
uh,
House.
yes, wasn't it Obama's? I think it was
Yes.
Obama's personal
Yeah, it
chef.
was Obama's. Yeah, Obama's.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could have got that wrong, but it's just whilst we're on the subject of baths. Wow, Mark, it's amazing talking to you. I keep dropping notes. So when this happens, I mean, The Simpsons has a bit to play as well, doesn't it? They sort of tell you in advance, don't they? Whether it's oh God, 9/11. I know I don't watch The Simpsons. I just see it on clips. 9/11, Prince, Joan Rivers going to yeah. So it's like they tell you in advance what's going on. Is that for a laugh, or is that because they're saying, look, we're telling you what's going to happen and you've accepted it? I mean, what's all that about?
We're getting into the phenomenon of what is known as predictive programming, which is a
Mm,
term that was coined by the late Scottish researcher Alan Watt. And there are
mm,
three main reasons why they do this, bearing in mind again that they're occultists and they're psychopaths and they're crazy. They're mentally ill. No sane, rational person with a regular, balanced life would engage in activities like this. But these people, if indeed they are people, do. And there's so much evidence to support this. So there are three main reasons why they place depictions of things that they know are coming in things like The Simpsons. They do it in movies, they do it in music videos, but The Simpsons has been a major vehicle for this over the years. And the odds of these events happening in exactly the same way as they did in The Simpsons, and it just being random chance, are surely at several billion to one. So you have to be in a very heavy state of denial not to accept that we're being told what is going to happen. And the only way that can be reconciled or any sense made of it is if you accept that the forces behind The Simpsons and these music videos, these movies, these TV shows are affiliated in some way with the forces that cause these world events to happen. Whether it's 9/11, whether it's COVID, whether it's Donald Trump becoming president, whether it's
mm,
Prince dying, whatever it may be. So, one of the reasons they do it is to establish a familiarity with the narrative in the minds of the general public. So, they'll place a sly subliminal reference to the Twin Towers being destroyed in a movie that they know is going to be seen by millions of people. It gets absorbed by the subliminal mind, which is where all the magic works, because the conscious mind is not engaged. This is why entertainment is such a brilliant vehicle for getting this stuff done. Because when people are watching a movie, TV show, listening to a favorite piece of music, they think they're just being entertained. Their minds are not on guard. So all kinds of stuff can seep in to the subliminal mind and be soaked up like a sponge without the conscious knowledge of their conscious mind.
mm,
So when the newsreader then comes out and says this event has happened, it's far more likely that these large numbers of people are going to accept what's being told due to the fact that they've already got a familiarity with the narrative embedded in their subconscious
yeah.
mind through all the movies they've been watching. A second reason comes down to the tenet of energy goes where attention flows. So there's a common belief that we can actually help to manifest our experienced physical reality by applying our consciousness to it. So if you've got millions or billions of people watching a movie where a certain event is happening, is being depicted, there's a belief that it can actually help that event to come into physical being due to the intensity of the consciousness that's being applied to it. And then the third reason why this gets done comes down to another of these sick, twisted belief systems of these crazy occultists. So they know damn well that there is consequentialism and what we might call karma in this reality, and that there are appropriate consequences that get dished out for our chosen behaviors and
Mm.
actions. So if they were to pull off a stunt like 9/11 and kill large numbers of people and just go right ahead and do it, they know that there would be consequences for them, payback. But if they can shift the emphasis for that event onto us, the masses, the people, by pre announcing that they plan to do it, then they're no longer responsible as they see it. So they've
Yeah.
shifted the onus onto us.
Us.
It's a very sick, twisted way of
Yeah.
looking at it because they're never upfront about it. They'll never
Yeah.
come right out and say, hey, folks, we plan on September 11th, 2001 to destroy the World Trade Center towers, to murder 3,000 odd people, to do the same thing with an event in Washington and Pennsylvania, and yeah, just create all this
Yeah.
chaos and this turmoil. You okay with that? Nobody's going to say, sure, sure, yeah, no
Yeah.
problem, go right ahead. But they
Yeah.
feel if they place these sly, tricky little references to it cryptically in symbolic coded form into movies and TV shows and stuff, when we're not smart enough to identify what we're being told and say, hang on a minute, we're not okay with this, we don't consent to this, they take it as a green light to go right ahead and do it because we've not said no. And to not say no is as good as saying yes in their sick, psychopathic, twisted mindset. That does explain a lot, doesn't it? That would explain why there are hundreds of references to 9/11 in movies and TV shows in the years and decades leading up to that event. Same thing with COVID. And so, again, any naysayers or skeptics that are going to write it off as just random chance and meaningless and there's nothing there to see are facing odds of several billion to one, if not several trillion, that this kind of thing can just happen randomly by chance and, there's nothing to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Good answer. Acquiescence, a very good answer. So you talked about like the sacrifice. Sacrifice. I've heard probably from your talks and reading your books about a lot of these people might have to sacrifice their firstborn. I guess that comes from the Bible. Is that true? Would you say? And also the 27th Club. I don't want to miss that one out. So can you
Right.
give us some wise words about those two aspects?
Unfortunately, the ritual sacrifice of a close family member or a close personal friend does seem to be a factor in the success of certain artists. So, again, if you don't come from one of these important bloodline families, if you're just from regular society and you've been selected for success, there is a way you can achieve that by putting up a member of your family. Often it is a firstborn child, but we often find parents, we
Oh,
can find cousins, and we can find many examples of this. Kanye West famously was very close to his mother, and his mother died in strange circumstances. She went in for some cosmetic surgery and died on the surgeon's table. And Kanye seemed very cut up about this, but many feel that that would have constituted some sort of ritual sacrifice on his part. Dr. Dre lost a brother. Jay-Z lost a cousin, talked about it in a song of his. Jay-Z bought a car for his cousin, and then his cousin died in a crash in that car. So when you get many, many of these, a pattern starts to form, and it goes beyond just being some random, terrible thing. The sacrifice of firstborn children seems to be a factor as well. Prince lost his firstborn son when he was very young. There are three British prime ministers in succession who all lost children. I believe they were firstborn. Uh, they certainly lost children if they weren't necessarily the firstborn. So David Cameron, Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown. This is uh, this is factual. You can look it up. It's
yeah.
right there on the public record. And we find this with just so many famous people. As you say, in the
Mhm.
Bible, there are stories of individuals being selected to sacrifice their firstborn children in exchange for great knowledge or whatever it may be, great power. And unfortunately, this does seem to be a factor in the world of entertainment. The whole thing becomes just so dark and so murky and so horrific that it really does become the case that you're far better off not making it famous in any of these fields. You're far better off not being a well known Hollywood actor. You're far better off not being a well known pop star or band or TV presenter or supermodel or celebrity chef or sports person or whatever it may be, business leader, anyone in the public eye. Because when you come to realize what's required of you to achieve that success, no amount of sports cars or yachts or mansions could ever make it worth it. And one satisfying thing, if there's a glimmer of optimism in all this, is that the likes of you and I, and most, if not all, people watching this show are in a far better position with what we can often think of as our mundane, ordinary,
Mm.
boring lives than these celebrities. Because I'm convinced there are so many of them who've crossed that line, they've realized they can never
Yeah,
go back, or they've been unfortunate enough to be born into the wrong family, and they've undergone mind control and satanic ritual abuse, and they would trade places with the likes of us in a heartbeat if they could, but they can't. There's
yeah,
no going back for them.
yeah.
So the 27 Club is this large number of musicians who have died at the age of 27 in some bizarre circumstance or other. I think in a couple of cases, these might be hoax deaths. So this is another thing which we have to wrap our heads around and try and uh, work, reconcile in some way. The idea that when a famous person is said to have passed away, it might not necessarily be the case.
Mm.
And a provision may have been made for them to be inducted into some sort of witness protection program type situation where they can change their identity and they're allowed to live out the rest of their life in relative obscurity. I think this is reserved for people from these important bloodline families or those who have served the system extremely well and are being rewarded for their service. So I'll throw a couple of examples in there, which I believe belong to this group. One would be Jim Morrison, frontman of The Doors, who we're told died at the age of 27 in his bathtub, funnily enough, in his Paris apartment in July 1971. Now, in many of my talks and my books, I've got into the fact that Jim Morrison's father was a Navy admiral, very high ranking, and he was actually involved in the fleet of ships that were tied up in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which has since been proven to have been a false flag psychological operation, but it was designed to springboard America into the Vietnam War. So Jim Morrison's dad basically started that whole thing. So, because of the family that Jim came from, I believe personally that his role as frontman of the Doors was an acting job. He was required to do it for a few years to fulfill certain agendas and change societal attitudes in certain ways. And in 1971, he was allowed to retire and go off into obscurity. He might even still be alive today. Who knows? He'd be very
Yeah,
old, but it's possible. He'd be about 80 by now.
yeah.
But I think this happens in certain circumstances. Another artist I would throw into that category would be Elvis Presley. I personally don't accept that he died when we're told he did in 1977 at the age of 42. And I've also got my doubts about David Bowie. So we're told he passed away age 69 of cancer in January 2016. Does anyone really believe that an artist like David Bowie would undergo chemo and radiotherapy, the same as us plebs out here, uh, and not have access to natural cures and technology which is suppressed and not revealed to the rest of us? So I think it's quite possible and probable that
Mm.
David Bowie is still out there somewhere.
Yeah,
But the rest of the 27 Club consists of people like Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, who died on the same date as Jim Morrison just 2 years earlier, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, Robert Johnson, and a great many others.
yeah,
So there comes a point where it goes beyond random chance or coincidence, and a conscious mind capable of critical thought has to accept that there's something deeper going on here.
yeah. It's funny, I was going to ask about Elvis at the end, actually, because there was always the rumors, wasn't there, when he was dead? They kept saying Elvis isn't dead, he's in the building, or I know they made joke of it, but they do kind of, as we were saying, they give you the messages, whoever they are. It could just be, yeah,
Yeah.
people like you and me making up rumors. But I hope he isn't dead. Well, I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
I always tell people when it comes to Elvis, I just say three words. Google three words: Pastor Bob Joyce. I'll leave it there.
Okay, all right, we shall leave that one there. Um, God, you blow me away thinking about Elvis. Actually, it's just taking me back because I was watching a clip of him the other day. Yeah, he got so big, didn't he, on the drugs, the medication.
Well, he did. I
So
mean, he wasn't in good shape when we're told
no,
he did die. He
but he
was
had a private doctor, didn't he?
very bloated and in
Yeah,
very poor health. But that doesn't necessarily mean he died when we're told he did.
no,
And if he was able to clean up his act, it's quite possible he could still be alive today. He'd be
yeah.
very old. He would be approaching 90, but it's possible.
Well, yeah, maybe they live to 150. These people have been like, moved to the other side of wherever they go, the other side of the Antarctic. Who knows? Because there's so much information out there, and I think we have to give credit to you for exposing, these pop stars and groups and what have you. What about other DJs like that are on the radio, mainstream DJs? Surely they must have an inkling that what's going on, but they keep just playing the music as normal. Are they part of this cult?
Oh, for sure they would. Yeah. In my first book, I highlight a lot of BBC radio DJs
Yeah,
who unfortunately have been exposed in recent years as having been grotesque paedophiles or sexual deviants of some nature or other. The obvious example is Jimmy Savile,
yeah,
but there are many others. Uh, who were thrown into that mix. Jonathan King, Chris
yeah.
Denning. There was even that there were revelations about John Peel, even who is thought of as being a rebel and anti-establishment and stuff. He was actually a very posh public schoolboy
Mm.
from a very well-to-do family, and I believe he was an actor. He was put out there as this working class hero and this guy that championed all these underground forms of music, but he worked for the BBC. He was on Radio 1 for decades. And it turns out that he married his wife when I think she was 15, and or he was in a relationship with her when she was 15. There's also Ed Stewart, who was known as
Mm.
Stu Pot. He was
People,
on
yeah.
radio, BBC Radio 2, and he married his wife when she was 13, somehow got away with it. So there's a lot of that stuff going on, and it's always the BBC. That's the common denominator
Yeah,
in all of it. But yeah, these famous DJs, for sure, they're going to know what the
yeah,
agenda is. They're going to be clued
yeah,
in, not necessarily into all of it,
yeah,
but they're also going to know that if they want to retain their careers and probably in some cases their lives, they just need to keep it zipped and
yeah,
don't overstep that mark. During COVID, for instance, how many famous DJs stepped forward to speak up? Uh, from the world of club DJs, there was Danny Rampling, there was Slipmatt, Norris the Boss Windross, a few other names. But if we think of well-known radio DJs, who
yeah.
was there? Who
I
said
know it was shocking. I think that was a massive wake up call for many of us, like how deep this thing went. When we were aware of something being going on here and people didn't speak up, not just the public, it was shocking. But we are where we are, and people are speaking out. Now, a couple of things. I know we're coming up for an hour. If I've still got you for another few minutes, if I may, Mark, 'cause I know you're a busy man. But it's like I've just written a couple of names of people, not particularly that I like, but because when we've spoken before, if I give you a name of an artist, I say, oh, please don't say let's Kate Bush. We love Kate Bush. Please don't say she's been bought as well. Because I actually watched them. I think she only did one live concert in Fulham or something, and I watched a recording of it at a pub the other day. She did a concert in the 70s. She's very, very creative, really creative, a bit bonkers in a way, but so artistic. And she was doing that video of the canon. I can't remember what it was about. It's recent, and it doesn't matter. Was it? Oh God, with Donald Pleasance was it? She did a
Oh,
movie where she
cloud
thought,
busting.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
Cloud
so
Buster. That's right. Yeah,
that was about the work of Wilhelm Reich,
right.
orgone
That's right.
energy
That's right.
technology. Yeah.
So therefore, she knows about other stuff that we don't all know about, everyday stuff. So I'm thinking she's got to be on our side. But is she? Has she been bought and sold?
There are no clear lines when it comes to many of these artists. Prince would be another one. There were times
Mm.
where Prince appeared to be on our side. He appeared to be communicating empowering knowledge. He talked about chemtrails on a TV chat show, for instance. But there are other times where he's pushing dark occult symbolism. He had pre knowledge of 9/11. There was a concert in 1998 where he was referencing Osama bin Laden getting ready to bomb. And then one of his band members mentions 2001. So that indicates foreknowledge of 9/11. And it's the same thing with Kate Bush. She clearly knows a lot. She moves in certain circles and is clued in on certain knowledge. So in cloud busting, she was talking about orgone energy technology, and she was talking about cloud seeding and weather modification, which is very real. It's going on right now. But in 1985, she put it into a song. There was that great video, which was basically a mini movie
Mm.
directed by Terry Gilliam of Monty Python fame. And it featured Donald Sutherland, who played Wilhelm Reich. And yeah, Kate knew about this stuff. She also had a song called Experiment 4, which was about sound weaponry, sonic, military grade weapons to do great harm to people. She spoke about that in that song, and there's a great video attached to it as well. She had a lot of esoteric, mystical knowledge, which got put into her songs. She appeared very ethereal and sort of
Mm.
ghost and spirit like in her whole demeanor in so many of her songs and videos. She's a fascinating character, but unfortunately, she also ticks all the boxes for having been a victim of mind control. And this is the case with most artists, I would say, who reach a certain level. They would have been subjected to MK Ultra style trauma based mind control programming. This is
Yeah.
a very clear thing with Michael Jackson, very clear thing with Prince, very clear thing with Madonna, and so many other artists you could mention. And Kate ticks many of the boxes for having undergone that as well. She's pushed a lot of dark stuff. So, as well as these wonderful, whimsical songs that she's put out, she's also had some very dark songs and videos, such as Lily. The song and video for Lily is quite disturbing, and there are many other examples of that as well. So that's why I say
Yeah.
it's never a clear cut thing. You can never make the
Yeah.
statement, "Oh, this artist is on our side," or
Yeah.
"This artist is doing great harm and is out to push agendas," because it's usually a bit of both.
Yeah. So what about reggae? You know, with Bob Marley? Would he, because he allegedly died of a foot injury, that cancer, and of, you know, is that true? Do you think? What's your opinion of Mr. Bob?
With Bob Marley, we have a very similar dynamic to the one with Jim Morrison, because Bob
Mm.
Marley's father, Norvell Sinclair Marley, was a British naval officer, white British from the elite establishment. His mother was black, but his father ran a slave plantation in Jamaica. You couldn't make it up, and you don't have to. So people will say with Jim Morrison and Bob Marley, well, they were both rebelling against their parents' belief systems, their values. Kids do that. And yes, they do. But Jim Morrison belonged to the Laurel Canyon crowd. That's a whole different story in itself. But there were a whole bunch of musicians who emerged out of this particular neighborhood in the Hollywood Hills of Los Angeles, known as Laurel Canyon. And these were all the influential musicians and bands of the mid to late 1960s. And it's been revealed that the fathers of pretty much all these musicians were high ranking military officials. They had
Wow.
connections to different expressions of the military, military intelligence, or other aspects of government. With Bob Marley, we don't get that. And whilst I believe that Jim Morrison was doing an acting job and his death wasn't real, with Bob Marley, I do accept that he was a genuine, sincere individual. So there was an attempt on his life in 1976 when he was attempting to unite the rival political factions in Jamaica. And he was due to take part in a concert with those aims in mind. And a couple of days before the concert, his home was shot up in a hail of bullets intended to kill him. And he survived that and he went on to perform the concert. But it seems from that point forward, his cards were marked
Yeah.
because the CIA, who aren't known for their desire to bring joy, happiness, and unity into the world, but rather stand for the opposite values, had their interests in Jamaica and they wanted to whip up turmoil and all manner of chaos down there. So it wouldn't have gone down too well, Bob Marley's stance on things. So after the attempt on his life, Bob Marley had holed himself up in a compound where he lived with his family members, and he had security on the gate to make sure no unwanted people came into this compound. One day, a young man turned up, according to research that I've done, and he claimed to be a documentary filmmaker who wanted to meet Bob, and he brought with him a gift. So Bob Marley was a fan of football, liked playing it, and the gift was a pair of football boots.
Mm.
The official story of what happened to Bob Marley is that he broke his big toe playing football, and it became cancerous and it spread throughout his body. The alternative take, according to some of those that were present at the time, is that this young guy gave Bob Marley the gift of a pair of football boots. And when Bob pulled on one of the boots, he cried out in pain. And when they closely examined the boot, there was a length of copper wire inside it which had pierced his big toe. So it's quite possible that this wire had been coated in some sort of cancer-causing agent, which then spread throughout Bob's body. I've been told that the documentary filmmaker in question went by the name of Carl Colby, and that he was the son of the one-time CIA director, William Colby. So then Bob got very ill, and in his latter months, he got allotted a doctor, a man by the name of Joseph Issels, who it turns out had been one of the doctors in the Nazi concentration camps in World War II in Germany. And he's been put in there as Bob Marley's personal physician. And then Bob Marley passed away eventually on the 11th of May, 1981, at the age of 36, when his cancer finally got the better of him. So I personally feel that Bob Marley was taken out because he was a genuine, sincere political activist.
Yeah.
He was putting out empowering message music that the powers that be would prefer didn't get out there. And that's just what I personally feel
Yeah.
about it.
And his music lives on, the legend.
Right.
Can I just ask two more questions or two more things, sort of questions? ABBA, because ABBA came out of Sweden, didn't they? I think they made more money than the car. They were the biggest industry for the whole of the country. And they've obviously had a resurgence, because I never really liked their music either. I don't like mainstream music, but I love the movie, Mamma Mia. Loved it because it had happy stories. And then, of course, they've got this, is it called ABBA-esque thing in London at the O2 Centre, which I was invited to go to a couple of years ago. And although it's phenomenal, it's fantastic, the holograms are absolutely incredible. Because I know what I know, and mainly through your work, I felt I was partaking in some sort of ritual. I left. Actually, I couldn't watch it because you could see all the pyramids and the animation. It really gave me the creeps. It really gave me the creeps. But then you think, well, ABBA, sweet, innocent, band, surely not ABBA. What would you say about ABBA?
The maxim remains that you cannot be as successful and influential as ABBA were and still are without being completely owned and controlled by the industry. They quite simply would not let it happen.
Yeah.
Same way with the Beatles. There's no way four regular working class lads from Liverpool would put together a band and they would just happen to become as famous as they did. ABBA are massive. They've influenced millions, if not billions of people, as you say. And when you do a delve into their background affiliations, you find a lot of close links to the Swedish royal family. They performed at many of their events. They've been knighted by them, the equivalent of our sort of OBEs and MBEs. And they've been pushing certain agendas as well. And as you say, they've undergone a resurgence in recent times. So in 1983, they split up. They put out Thank You for the Music, and it all seemed very final. Bjorn and Benny went on to do their musicals and stuff, but it really did seem as if that band was finished. And then, what do you know, during COVID, they're back. One theory that has been offered to me is that ABBA were very popular in Australia. So in the 1970s, they really endeared themselves to Australian audiences. During the COVID years, as we know, there was a lot of tyranny that got unleashed on Australians. And happily, there was also a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
So many Australians were like, we're not having this. We're standing up to these forces. There were a lot of freedom rallies and protests and stuff. So it's been suggested to me that ABBA may well have been instructed to reform so that Australians could be diverted away from the political activism that was happening in their nation and instead be all caught up in ABBA fever all over again. Oh, ABBA, we love ABBA. Isn't it great that they've reformed? Let's listen to all their old songs again and see what their performances are like now. You know, they want you looking over here so that you're not seeing what's going on over here. And I think that's quite possible.
Yeah.
And
Distraction.
I believe that these groups never really retire. They might think they're out, but it's like these cliched Hollywood movies you see where you've got some former grizzled old CIA guy and he's out fishing on a lake with his grandchildren or something, and he gets a phone call and he says something like, "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. One more mission." And I think it's that way with these pop stars as
Cool.
well.
I think so. Fabulous, Mark. I think we should bring it to an end now because we've gone probably just over the hour. How do you saying that? Keep asking you questions, but where do you think we're going? You know, with all the research that you've done, do you have any idea? Are we just going to continue going down rabbit holes, exposing people, and just carrying on with our life? What's around the corner for you?
I really dislike that question. I do get it a lot.
Do you?
Yeah,
You don't have to answer.
many people seem to think I'm some kind of guru or sage or seer, and I'm none of those things.
No.
I'm stumbling in the dark, the same as anyone else, just trying to make the best of a situation. My worst fear is that we'll just go on the way we have been.
Yeah.
My worst fear is that in 20 or 30 years, we'll be in prison cities, in a smart grid controlled by 5G, AI, and a social credit system, because we know that's where they want to take things. My worst fear is that the masses will simply allow it to happen. I'm not saying I believe that's what will happen, but that's something that I greatly fear. And the likes of Hancock, Whitty, Johnson, Fauci, Gates, all the rest of them, Schwab, will still be walking around free men. Well, there's not much chance of Schwab being around in 30 years, given that he's in his 80s. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
My worst fear is that those who have committed huge crimes against humanity will just get away with it, literally get away with murder. Then the flip side of that is that there will have been some sort of massive awakening, a massive pushback where huge numbers of people have twigged as to how they've been monumentally duped and how this world is just so different to how it's been presented to us. Uh, if I'm being realistic about it, I don't see that happening, unfortunately. I wish it would, but from where I'm standing at the moment or sitting, the former scenario that I've outlined there is the most likely. Uh, I'll certainly be doing all I can for the rest of my
Yeah.
days to ensure that doesn't happen. And I know there are a great many wonderful people doing outstanding work out there. And I commend each and every one of them because we're a team and
Yeah.
we're working together towards the goals that we want to achieve. And nothing's going to, stop us from doing that. No
Yeah.
matter how hopeless or dark it may seem, for the rest of our days, we're going to do what we know to be
Yeah.
the right thing. So maybe we will turn it around. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I guess we just have to wait and see.
We have to wait and see. If we knew, we wouldn't be doing the work, I guess, would we? And
Right.
it'll be boring. So, because you never know what is around the corner.
Well,
And
yeah. Whatever else life is at the moment, it's
yeah,
not boring.
no, it's it's not boring.
There's many
It's
other
very
things, but not boring.
challenging, exhausting, lovely, fun. Well, if they just let us really have some fun, if they turn those, taps off and let us have, it's sunny now. It's where I'm at. It's sunny, but it's been challenging. Um,
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah. Mark, you're amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. Honestly, you have inspired so many people, woken up so many people because, you're just saying what's going on behind the scenes, which we didn't know. And I remember when I first met you at the Glastonbury symposium, gosh, many years ago, many years, and I was just in the crowd and saw your to the talk and bought your book and read it, and it just changed my life about, you know, the celebrity status. Nobody gets anywhere really without a hand up, a leg up, or signing something they shouldn't sign. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I'm going to be seeing you in a couple of weeks, I think, at the next UpRise and Shine. And you are all
Indeed.
over the place doing tours. I know you're everywhere. So you're probably, I don't know, I'm surprised you're living in a van, actually, because you are all over the country. And you just come back from America and Australia. So, you know, well done for sharing the knowledge and spreading the wisdom.
Yeah, well, thanks, Karen. We all do what we can. We all make
Yeah.
our individual contributions. You put on some great events and you do,
Yeah.
presentations yourself. You're doing your work. And many of the people that you feature at Uprise are doing very different things to me. But as long as we all make some kind of contribution
Yeah,
and call on our individual skill sets, then
absolutely.
we'll get to where we need to be. So,
And
yeah,
I think there is a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. I mean, I still get emails and stuff through the Freedom Network that I set up, which was a means for people to find themselves all over the country with other like-minded people and, yeah, talk about whether it's food or music or currency or home education or spirit, the whole lot, you know, the whole new world that we need to create for ourselves. So I think it
sure.
will happen. I think it will happen.
Yeah.
I'm an
Well,
optimist.
if we exit this world
Yeah.
whenever our time comes, and we can make the statement that it's slightly better than it would have been if we'd never incarnated into it, who could
Yeah.
ask any more, you know?
Absolutely, and I think if we live, you know, with our moral compass and with integrity, and you know, we've done our bit, that's it. Because it's just a journey, isn't it? It's a very challenging journey, but that's how I see it. It's a journey, and I don't know what the next journey is, but yeah, maybe a little bit more relaxing, a bit more sunshine.
Would be
Anyway,
nice.
it
Yeah.
would be nice. I wish you well, Mark. I'm going to stop the recording. So for those watching this, thank you very much for joining us with Mark Devlin at Wise Women Weekdays. If you did like it, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe and share. And any comments, let us have them. And I'm sure I can get them to Mark and get those answered. So thank you very much.
Cheers.